The sun had barely risen over Jerusalem when sirens pierced the morning silence, echoing through the ancient streets. Smoke billowed above the Mount of Olives, climbing like a monstrous tongue, devouring everything in its path: time, memory, and sacred history. Flames danced among olive trees that had stood for centuries as helicopters roared overhead and firefighters sprinted through narrow alleys. The fire was not just any fire, it was heading towards something sacred. Beyond the trees, beyond the smoke, lay Aqsa Mosque. It began like any emergency. Radios screamed at a chaotic fire command center. "All units, full alert!" one commander shouted. "The fire is heading toward the old city." Over 200 firefighters from across Israel, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, united to fight this inferno. But it wasn't just stone and timber at stake. It was legacy, belief, and perhaps global stability. One senior firefighter, Yaakov Mizrahi, pale and trembling, looked out over the horizon and muttered, "If that mosque burns, the world will explode." As flames swallowed ancient olive groves, emergency crews realized they weren't just racing against fire. They were racing against time, prophecy, and the fragile balance of peace in the Holy Land. Maps were pinned across walls, eyes locked on wind patterns. Digital screens blinked with temperature spikes and shifting airflows. The fire was merciless, and its path unmistakable. It was charging straight towards Al-Aqsa, one of the holiest sites in Islam, revered by over 1 billion souls across the planet. Helicopters dropped water in desperate arcs, but the heat rose higher, wind howled louder, and fire danced faster. This was no ordinary wildfire. To those witnessing it, it felt apocalyptic, as if judgment itself had arrived on wings of flame. Some firefighters wept in silence, while others clenched their jaws, refusing to let history burn on their watch. But deep in every heart, one question quietly sparked. Why now? And why there? For hours the wind showed no mercy. It blew the flames straight toward Al-Aqsa. Digital models showed the fire would reach the mosque courtyard in less than 2 hours. The heat pressed against ancient walls, hope dwindled, and then the wind changed. Clouds rolled in. Rain, unforecasted and unexpected, began to fall. The fire curved almost intentionally, forming a perfect arc around the mosque. It encircled the holy site, but never touched it. On the ground, men who had faced infernos for decades looked at each other in silent awe. Something beyond them, something unseen, had intervened. When the smoke cleared, what remained was not only blackened earth, but hearts ignited by a different kind of flame. In the firehouse, exhausted men sat in silence, trying to process what they had just survived. Ariel Ben Shimon, alone in the locker room, whispered to himself, "I stood 20 meters from the northern gate. The fire came from 3 sides, but it stopped at the fence, and I felt something, not human, not physical, something divine." Days later, several firefighters returned to Al-Aqsa, not in uniform, not on duty, but as seekers. A group entered the mosque courtyard quietly, drawn not by curiosity, but by something deeper. There, an elderly man with a Quran welcomed them beneath an olive tree. "You didn't come just to see the mosque," he said. "You came because your hearts are burning from something no logic can explain." Ariel's voice cracked. "Why didn't the mosque burn?" The old man smiled gently. "Because it is not we who protect this place, but the Lord of the heavens and the earth." And so they sat, listening to the Quran under those same olive trees, the same grove that nearly burned. Sheikh Abdullah spoke to them softly. "Wounds can bring us to truth, far more than comfort ever could." Then he recited from the Quran, "Whoever is saved from the fire and admitted to paradise has indeed triumphed, and this worldly life is nothing but deceptive enjoyment." In that moment, Ariel, now trembling, tearful, rose to his feet. "If this truly is light from God," he said, "then I don't want to run from it anymore." He recited the Shahada. "Ashhadu alla ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah." One by one, others stood. By the end of the day, 207 firefighters had embraced Islam. News of the mass conversions rippled through the region like a shockwave. Synagogues, churches, mosques, and coffee shops buzzed with disbelief. Headlines called it the fire that changed faith. Some celebrated it as a miracle, a sign of divine presence in an age of doubt. Others condemned it, calling it hysteria or even treason. But for those 207 men and women, something had shifted permanently. Not just in their beliefs, but in their souls. Firefighter Danny Levy, once a proud secular Israeli, now wore a simple white kufi. "I used to think fire was the most powerful force on earth," he told a reporter, "but fire bows to the one who created it." The ripple reached beyond borders. In Turkey, a retired imam wept openly on live TV upon hearing the story. In Indonesia, Friday sermons were filled with references to the Jerusalem blaze. In parts of Europe, skeptics and seekers alike downloaded the Quran in record numbers, looking for what could have touched hardened men so deeply. Meanwhile, in the United States, media networks scrambled to fact-check the story, only to find photos, video clips, and official fire data lining up with the impossible. A blaze that curved around a holy site with scientific explanations falling short. In Israel itself, debate erupted. Some politicians demanded investigations, others called for calm, yet under the radar, quiet conversions began spreading, from paramedics to journalists, even among those in the military. For many, it wasn't just the fire they remembered, it was the look in Ariel's eyes as he recited the Shahada, a kind of peace not born from ideology, but from surrender, not to a cause, but to a creator. Soon, whispers of change began to echo in the halls of power. Intelligence agencies issued internal memos, warning of ideological infiltration and religious subversion within critical infrastructure units. Security briefings labeled the mass conversion a potential national security concern, but no policy or crackdown could extinguish what had already taken root. Firehouses once filled with crude banter and coffee-stained uniforms now bore quiet corners for prayer. Qurans sat beside radios. Some responders continued their jobs with new names, new identities, and a deeper sense of purpose. One captain, once known for his cynicism, was now leading Fajr prayers before sunrise shifts. "We saw death that day," he told his wife, "but we were brought back to life in its ashes." What followed wasn't rebellion, it was rebirth. Neighborhoods began to shift subtly. Conversations once avoided, about faith, meaning, the soul, now filled dinner tables and public parks. Converts didn't preach, they simply lived differently. Humbler, calmer, more present. They held open doors longer, greeted strangers with peace, and it began to unsettle some. "Are we losing our identity?" one commentator asked on national television. But another guest, a Jewish rabbi known for his interfaith work, responded with tears in his eyes. "Maybe they're not losing something. Maybe they're finding what we've all been missing." Behind the scenes, a quiet investigation was launched into the phenomenon. Psychological profiles, fire trajectory analyses, interviews with the converted. Yet each report ended with the same frustrating conclusion. No coercion, no conspiracy, no manipulation. Just a moment, an unexplainable moment, that cracked open hundreds of hearts at once. And while the fire may have been extinguished in the physical sense, its spiritual blaze was only just beginning to spread. But not everyone celebrated. The media erupted, social platforms mocked them, accusations of betrayal flooded the internet. Former colleagues distanced themselves, yet none of that mattered to those who had witnessed what happened with their own eyes and hearts. They had seen fire bend back. They had seen what no news anchor could explain. Ahmad Benur, formerly Ariel, still wears his uniform, but before every shift, he opens the Quran, he teaches others, he prays. His battle is no longer just with physical fire, but with the deeper blaze that once consumed his soul. Across borders and ideologies, the event stirred unease in power corridors that relied on the status quo. In private meetings, think tanks and policy advisors spoke of a new religious undercurrent forming from the ashes of state authority. Surveillance quietly increased around mosques and dawah circles, especially in Jerusalem. Undercover agents were tasked with monitoring Friday sermons. Yet the more they watched, the more they found no organized agenda, only sincerity. Men and women who once lived on adrenaline and instinct now spoke with softness, wept in prayer, and found strength not in commands, but in surrender. It was disarming, and for some, deeply threatening. Internationally, the story split opinion. In France and Germany, where secularism guards the public square like doctrine, it sparked panic. Editorials warned of emotional manipulation and the encroachment of foreign religiosity. In the Muslim world, however, it was seen as a divine sign, not just for those who converted, but for the Ummah as a whole. "This is not about numbers," said one scholar in Cairo. "It's about the unseen hand of Allah reminding us that guidance can come at any moment, even through flame." Conversions began to rise in places least expected, remote towns in the Balkans, urban blocks in Latin America, and even inside some government offices. The fire had moved from forests to hearts, and amid the noise, Ahmad Banur remained a symbol. He didn't speak at conferences. He didn't start a YouTube channel. He simply lived his new life with integrity. Once every week, after the Friday prayer, he sat outside Al-Aqsa with a small group of firefighters, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, agnostic, reading verses not to debate, but to understand. "I don't want to win arguments," he once told a journalist. "I just want to reflect the peace I was given." 1 year later, Al-Aqsa's courtyard was filled again, but this time it wasn't smoke that rose above its walls. It was the serene call to prayer. The same men who once fought to save the mosque now stood shoulder to shoulder, praying inside it. From the loudspeakers, a heartfelt dua echoed across the compound. "O Allah, you sent fire upon our hills, perhaps only to light the hearts of these men." As the sun set behind the golden dome, the sky blushed in hues of peace. Al-Aqsa stood untouched, glorious. Text appeared across the screen. "We thought we were saving the mosque, but the truth is, it was the mosque that saved us." Yusuf Zakai, former atheist firefighter. Then the final message. Guidance comes in many forms. For them it came in the shape of fire,